Morning team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part thereof for the 31st of May 2024. A lot to get through as per normal. I've been trying to get my head around the political fallout from the conviction made yesterday in a New York court. Goodness me, it's all happening. Right, we'll stay with Ukraine now, of course. Looking at the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video found below. 1,390 personnel lost is a big uptick from yesterday's figure that was in the 1,100s. We're now almost at 1,400. That's a considerable difference, I would say. 18 tanks is also a high number. 22 armoured personnel vehicles, I think it's slightly lower than yesterday. And 39 artillery systems, marginally, I think, higher, if I remember correctly. So some fairly hefty figures for the Russian losses there. No multiple launch rocket systems or anti-aircraft warfare pieces. 11 pieces of special equipment, fairly high, and 56 vehicles and fuel tanks is likewise fairly high. So I think another challenging day for the Russians, and it's this just consistent degradation of the Russian forces. When you see figures like this, even if you were to take 30% off these as being, I don't know, propaganda, incorrect, whatever, even if you took 30% off these every single day, you would have Russia being in trouble. And I think, judging by the behaviour of the Russian forces, they must be in trouble with their equipment stockpiles. In fact, when we go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list, that yesterday was absolutely phenomenal. Today is absolutely phenomenal. They cannot keep doing this. I mean, they are continually doing this, and I do consistently say they can't keep doing this. But I think we are getting to the point where we are seeing evidence that they can't keep doing this. So they are using more and more they're using suboptimal vehicles more and more often on the front lines. We're seeing motorbikes being used an awful lot, like I keep saying. ATVs, so quads, and golf carts and garden track sheds. I think the Russians might be in a little bit of trouble. We're also just seeing areas where they're not using an awful lot of vehicles, like in the Kharkiv attack, where some of the theories were that they're supposed to be getting to this point within 3 days. You can't do that without vehicles. So the fact they're not doing that, they're just mainly infantry-based attacks, would either tell you that those objectives were just plain wrong, and or that they just don't have the equipment they would like in order to bring to bear at somewhere like the Kharkiv Oblasts. Okay, Ukrainians have lost, let's see, nothing at all of any huge value there. There's nothing. You know, the odd piece of artillery tank, a single piece of artillery, single tank, single IFV, single APC, single MRAP, a decoy tree down there as well. So very little. And then we've got a ratio of, goodness me, 7-1. That's a guess. Something like that. It's a bad day at the office for the Russians. They have lost 2 ships, 2 rail ferries, well, damaged, but I don't think they're going to be used in a hurry, and that was in the strike on Kerch. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. It's actually more significant than you might think. Air defense system, Estrella 10, that's short-range air defense system. Another one has been destroyed there. Electronic warfare equipment damaged, and some surveillance and comms equipment. Multiple launch rocket system there. We're getting down to the tanks, quite a list of tanks again. A few with mine plows, T-80s, T-72s, T-90M abandoned again. I think that might be the one that fell into a crater caused by a guided munition, and then it was finished off with a drone. And I've seen imagery of that just now. And as you can see here, most of these abandoned or destroyed, which generally means they're not going to get these back. They're not going to use these again. They might get them back for scrap, as seems to be the case in some places. Infantry fighting vehicles, not as big a list as we have seen, but a few of those to be added to the list. And then APCs as well, mainly MTLBs. When I say mainly, I mean entirely. And then a lot of trucks damaged and a couple destroyed. Those would be first-person view drones, as you can see. Quite a few night vision drone attacks listed in today's list here. But mainly it is, I mean, there's the odd mine here, but we're not really seeing first anti-tank guided missiles. We're not really seeing any shelling, apart from, there's one there. But generally speaking, everything is being done by drones. Of different types. So you got your first-person view drones, night vision and daytime. Then you got vampire drones, your octocopters, drone drop munitions, although not too many of those there. So yeah, a lot of civilian vehicles here, such as loafs, flatbed trucks, SUVs, few motorcycles. We've got a couple of ATVs and a couple of golf carts. So yeah, really significant losses of the offensive Russian military vehicles, such as tanks and whatnot, and just a huge number of trucks and civilian vehicles. The logistics must surely be hurting for the Russians. I've been saying that for a good long while, though. I swear the Russians must be suffering somewhat with because remember, these are visually confirmed losses. These aren't just general staff figures, like numbers that you're looking at going, well, I can't tell if they're true. This is where we say, well, we can tell if they're somewhat true, because this is a massive list of visually confirmed pieces of kit that have been lost over the last 24 hours or so. Right, moving on to the strike on or near the Kerch Bridge, claimed to be ATACMS. First pictures of 2 ferries hit with ATACMS the other night. Ferries were actively involved in supplying and supporting Russian troops. Now, there is talk about how this is actually fairly systematic, what is going on here, as you would imagine. I mean, if you're doing war, you're not going to be just randomly sending missiles into places to, just for shits and giggles. This is a systematic approach to stopping the Russians supplying across the Kerch Strait, since the heavy loads can't go across the Kerch Bridge still, by all accounts. They have to be taken by ferries, not just any ferries, these are rail ferries. So where you can put a train onto or rolling stock onto the ferry and get it across the Kerch Strait to Crimea, and then feed your forces in both Crimea and Kherson and up to Zaporizhia as well, rather than come maybe the long way around through Donetsk. Well, you won't be able to do that until that railway is properly finished, which is going to be fairly soon, but you're imagining that's going to be hammered by Ukrainian munitions. There was also, around that same time the 2 ferries were hit, there were 4 KC-701 transport and landing boats. The 2 nets boats that were taken out of action, 2 were destroyed and 2 were damaged. And that was done by those Magura V5, the Sea Baby naval drones. Also, there were other boats hit as well. So that was a few nights ago. There's been a bit of a challenging time for the Russian logistics. Right. The Russian front in the south was also a little blinded to PS-01 on the night of May the 30th. And I presume that was not last night, but the night before, but I'm not too sure about this. SBU military counterintelligence drones turned off the Russian Nebo SVU radar. Now, I reported on one of these, located at Armyansk in the northern part of Crimean Peninsula, but I don't think it was this one. So the one that I mentioned previously was at the Luhansk air base that was struck some nights back. These are really high-value bits of kit, the Nebo radars. And another one appears to have been targeted in northern Crimea, worth $100 million, controlled a 380 kilometre section of the front. So if they've taken out 2 of these radar installations in short order, then that is really affecting the Russian ability to acquire targets. You've also seen those over-the-horizon radars be targeted in 2 separate places. You have seen S-300 and S-400 batteries being taken out. This is a systematic degradation of the Russian radar capability and air defense capability. And then when you're also adding Strela 10s and Book M1, 2s and 3s to that, you are seeing that the Ukrainians are surely shaping the battlefield ready for the F-16s to be employed. there's quite a lot of footage going around concerning air-to-air combat of drones. This is an interesting one because you've got two fixed-wing drones having a dogfight, and I believe this is a Ukrainian fixed-wing drone taking out a Russian fixed-wing drone, although it does go dark. I don't really know what's going on there. Andrew Perpetual quite often posts air-to-air combat, but he says this video brings the lols. Ukrainian drones neutralizing Russian recon drones would fundamentally change this war in a way that Russia cannot and will not ever be able to recover from. So Andrew's been taking quite a bullish view on what's going on recently, and it's interesting because I have as well, and I'm just wondering, I keep saying, am I being too hopeful, too optimistic? Because I just get a sense that it can't be this positive for the Ukrainians. It just can't. Now, I think it's really, really tough for the Ukrainians at the moment, but I think where people have been concentrating on how tough it's been for the Ukrainians, they forget to look at how tough it is for the Russians. And that's why I keep saying that the Ukrainians are on their knees, but actually it's been coming down like this, so the Russians are on their knees. I just think maybe the Russians are more on their knees than we might think. And this is supported by a whole number of different data points that I keep talking to you about. And the whole idea that, and Andrew talked about this yesterday, you would if you could, you aren't so you can't. The fact that they aren't throwing consecutive nights of Shahed drones and cruise missiles and Kinzhals into Ukraine means that they don't have that ability. They could be stockpiling them for the employment of the F-16s. That is your best argument for not using way more of those munitions. But also when you look at the front lines, can we really foresee a massive summer attack when they've just put 50,000 people into Kharkiv and they've ground to a halt and they're unable to use huge amounts of mechanized equipment? You know, I don't get a sense that Russia are able to commit to a successful war going forward without a mass mobilization. And that would take then months and months before those people were ready to be executed in the war, as in not executed like that, but used, prosecuted in the war as trained up frontline troops. Basically, if Ukraine can scale what happens in this video to occur 100 to 200 times a day, says Andrew, Russia is screwed in a way that is actually incomprehensible. Scaling is easier said than done. A one-off event obviously is irrelevant, but this sort of adaptation from Ukraine would be game-changing. I think what he's getting at is that one of the biggest challenges for the Ukrainians, and I keep talking about this myself, is how the hell do they get these Orlan 10s or Zala or Orlan 30, whatever reconnaissance drone is active above the Ukrainian territories, 100 kilometers back from the front line? How are they using these drones with impunity and then striking with this kind of missiles? If you can knock these drones out with air-to-air drone capabilities, then Russia are in trouble, because one of the things that it can do successfully at the moment is strike things like some of these air bases at Dnipropetrovsk, at Mykolaiv, take out some of these launchers and radar positions that are 100 kilometers or so back from the front line. They've been doing that fairly well over the course of over the last year for sure. And there's been this challenge with doing something about the Russian reconnaissance drones. Now, if this is a scalable thing, I don't know if this is just randomly there's another drone up in the sky, but it seems unlikely that you would have one of your drones scouting around your own. It may have been on the way to do a mission over Russian territory and saw this other drone, or this could be some kind of way of dealing with Russian reconnaissance drones over Ukrainian territory. And as Andrew says, if this is scalable, if this is some kind of defensive project that is scalable, then that will have a really meaningful effect on the Russian ability to prosecute this war, because this is one of their areas of success. Right, and moving on. Now, again, in this whole area of, are Russia in trouble or not? And I think they are. And I'm going to bring another piece of evidence to suggest that Russia are in trouble. And I don't want to just try and be optimistic for the sake of it and try and be positive. I think genuinely everywhere I look at the moment, there are just signs of Russian issues with Russia. So some more updates on depleted Russian storage facilities. So we looked at a lot of John P's threads before, where he's looked at the stockpiles of, say, NTLBs, towed howitzers, or self-propelled guns, or whatever it might be, infantry fighting vehicles, BMPs, and says, okay, we've seen them deplete, and the ones that are left are mainly cannibalized or not fit for purpose, etc., and said, okay, things are looking bad with this vehicle. There are no BMP3s left at all, like zero in storage. Then you got BMP2s are like this, BMP1s like that, and then MTLBs, so on and so forth. And I don't think it's looking good for MTLBs, if I remember correctly. They're almost out of storage, right? So that's the context. Some more updates on depleted Russian storage facilities. And he's referring back to the work of Waffenträger. First, the 7,027th base at Pospalicha. Not a single piece of equipment is left there, just an active surveillance radar station from the 590th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment. So, looking at these bases and storage bases and seeing literally nothing, you're thinking, oh, that's interesting. It was already mostly depleted by late 2022. The base stored mostly engineering equipment, especially pontoons. So let's go back to those images. So there are things here. You can see stuff there. Engineering equipment and pontoons for pontoon bridges. This is the end of 2022, so they'd already depleted it largely for the war already. Well, now there is zero. There's nothing left. At another base near Atshinsk, almost all the special pontoon and fording equipment is gone too, and even many trucks. So here we have more satellite imagery. I'm not sure exactly what this shows. It looks like those are the recent ones rather than earlier ones, and that's showing apparently that there's a lot of fording equipment. And so this thread is mainly about the support equipment and engineering equipment as opposed to infantry fighting vehicles and whatnot. Another base where most engineering equipment is gone is the one near Sosnovka. So here we have, I presume that's a before, as it then starts deteriorating to a point where most of it has gone. I think there's still obviously some in some places like down here, but the ones in the main area of the base have somewhat gone. Yeah, over here. But yeah, I don't, without knowing what the date of each of these images are, I don't know exactly what I'm looking at. So I'm rather relying on his synopsis here. And I say most because by August, most of what remains looks to be broken and beyond repair. Just look at the state of the ammunition left there by then. So this is a case of, if you looked closely at these and zoom in, it's basically just stuff that's unusable. They look like sort of husks there, like very much rusty, tarnished husks of vehicles and equipment. The 7,022nd Arsenal is still abandoned too, so it has nothing there. And then it wouldn't be the first time this happens. Going back to April the 7th, if you research, you'll find many former storage bases that the Russian military eventually abandoned or sold. Here's one such, 7,045th at Armavir, which is actually where that big radar station they keep attacking at the moment is. Another base I didn't know of until I was told about it is a 1015th factory for repair of military technical property. Mentioned it a while ago. As you can see, it is entirely depleted too. It stored a lot of trucks, and so that's that base. Now, there's literally nothing there at all. And that's it for now. So what he's done, and if I understand him correctly, I mean, some of those images, I wasn't sure quite what I was looking at in terms of time-wise, and there didn't seem to be too much difference between, say, some of these images there But the idea is that a lot of these engineering stockpiles have been run completely dry. And with regard to forwarding equipment or AEVs, armored engineering vehicles, they've just used up all their stockpiles. And that is another sign that Russia could be in trouble in terms of the amount of armoured vehicles they can bring to bear in the war going forward. More Russia on fire. Tim White here saying, and this one's quite an important one because we've been waiting for this, basically. It could happen in a number of places because Putin owns a lot of luxury properties, but it's been reported that one of Putin's many luxury premises may be on fire. In the Ongudai district of the Altai Republic, a big residence burns. The Russian dictator is thought to have hosted the Prime Minister of Italy, Silvio Berlusconi, here in 2015. So that was yesterday. And something that I think we were expecting, certainly along the coast, maybe Sochi direction. He's got some big old palaces dotted around. Are the Ukrainians going to spend a lot of time trying to hit locations like that have very little military value but could have significant PR value? I don't know. Then in the Krasnodar region, and this was last night, I don't know if this has anything to do with strikes because there were a number of strikes last night as well. But in the Krasnodar region, Russia's emergency services say this is just a vegetable warehouse burning in Kalinino, 100 kilometers north of Krasnodar city. So there was Russia on fire there as well. Right, then we go on to these strikes from last night, and I'm trying to work out exactly what has been going on. There's quite a lot of information, but not a huge amount of clarity. We will start with what Russia did to Ukraine, and they struck Kharkiv city a number of times yesterday in a way that was not cool at all. There were many war crimes, essentially, as they slammed S-300s into residential buildings. And there were claims from the residents in the area that there were no military targets there at all. This is just targeting civilian infrastructure. So 5 missiles hit Kharkiv, said Tim White last night. Part of a 5-story building of flats has been destroyed. A fire is burning. Early reports of multiple injuries and people still trapped in the ruins. And then he was updating through the night, 8 people injured. And then, this just got more and more. And it was number of injured rises to 12. Still no photos of the scene. 1 body has been found. So then you start having deaths as well as injuries and so on and so forth. It was not good for Kharkiv yesterday and last night. And then, as he reported this morning, but early in this morning, I don't think that Tim White ever sleeps. He says, first, though, a mini thread on the latest atrocity in Kharkiv. It is an atrocity, a war crime, but the world does not seem to care. Has the UN even acknowledged a previous murder of civilians at the epicenter? That's that large hypermarket, construction hypermarket that was hit the other day. Here's the first video from the apartment block hit by Russia. So there's videos of destruction caused there to civilian infrastructure. 3 civilians have been murdered and 23 known injuries in Kharkiv. Those numbers may yet increase again. Russia fired multiple missiles into the same area. And there's just, these are residential buildings just completely unnecessarily impacted by military ordnance. Again, a double tap attack with Russia waiting a short time after the initial attack before hitting again at the New Bavaria district in western Kharkiv. Emergency responders were hit. A police officer and a medic are among the 23 injured. There's an ambulance with its screen done in. There are just lots of images of destruction. So Kharkiv has been hit. That much we can be certain of. It's feared that in Kharkiv more bodies were found in the ruins of the bomb site. Russia fired S-300s at an apartment block. 4th and 5th bodies were discovered this morning. 25 people were wounded, including first responders in that double tap, he said later. Tim White, that is. So, that has happened. Also, Kyiv was targeted. There is damage here, and it's damage from debris that comes down. And you might often say, "Oh, really? I mean, was it actually debris, or did this missile hit?" And that's because that's what the Russians say a lot. Well, could the Ukrainians also be talking rubbish? But actually, this is properly caught on camera. So I think this missile was intercepted, caught on camera. It's in the daytime. Interestingly, it was caught really, really low. So actually, wherever it was aiming at, it was pretty close to it when it was hit, one would assume. Those with me all night know I feared for Kyiv when a missile was shot down very close to the ground in Holosivsky district. It turns out a transformer was hit by debris causing power cuts to some. A service station, car wash, and 6 cars were damaged. So there was some damage in Kyiv, but what was the intended target? I don't know, but this is the one here. Here's a video of the missile being hit, which may give a better idea of how close it was before it was to reaching its target, but also how close air defense missiles must have been to buildings. There is smoke on the ground, but just debris and no fire. So there is evidence that was actually hit out of the air, and it was the debris that caused the problem. Okay, then it goes on to, we're going to go on to Ukraine hitting Russia. So it seems like Ukraine has occupied Luhansk region last night. Explosion occurred in Pervomaisk. A fire started. The occupiers say HIMARS rockets damaged a gas pipeline. They did not comment on casualties, so perhaps a gas pipeline hit by HIMARS. Don't really know anything else about that. What else? In Russia, another oil depot is on fire. Ukraine's being blamed again for the blaze in Temryuk area of Krasnodar region. The governor reports 3 tanks with oil products were on fire. And employees were injured. And that is now raging by the looks of it. Update on Ukraine's attack on the oil terminal in Krasnodar region. Some pretty pictures too. Ukraine's own updated Neptune missiles caused this damage. Apparently, another blow to Russia's ability to keep all military vehicles fueled. So this is light petroleum, I believe. Now, this is significant if they're using Neptune missiles to do this sort of damage. I've been waiting for them. They've been claiming that they've got Neptunes that can fire up to 1,000 kilometers. And they are, importantly, indigenously constructed, so they can strike at anything Ukraine deems fit. Here, they've used them to slam into an oil depot in a way that drones would be unable to. So drones, sometimes when they impact, they don't actually do enough damage to the oil depots to cause them to explode or stop functioning. And often drones can be shot down, right? Neptune missiles are harder to shoot down. Now, going back to... we're going to start with just a bit of a synopsis by PS01. Part of a multi-day operation conducted by the Defence Forces of Ukraine together with the SBU. According to preliminary information, a comprehensive attack was made on substations and power supply networks, as well as the stocks of light petroleum products in the Krasnodar region of the Russian Federation. First, the Defence Forces launched a missile attack on 2 ferries that were travelling to the port Kavkaz and were used for military logistics of the aggressor. Then the SBU drones hit electrical substations that supply electricity directly to the Crimean Peninsula and to the waters of the Kerch Strait, including ports. As a matter of fact, this night the SBU, together with the Navy of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, attacked the transshipment oil depot in the Kavkaz seaport. Light oil products went to the Crimea through it. So I think this is all part of a systematic degradation of the Russian ability to do their logistics. So we've seen rail ferries be hit in the Kerch port, some port infrastructure hit. We've got this Kavkaz, interesting sort of weird area that is offshore of Crimea there. That's been hit, the port of Kavkaz there. This is it's around here where the big grain carrying ships do their transshipment, sort of moving grain from one ship with its transponders turned off to another ship with its transponders turned off, so that the dodgy cargo can be put onto another ship or mixed with, say, you'll have stolen Ukrainian grain mixed with Russian grain, so on and so forth. Anyway, around 80 kilometers away from Temryuk is another port, Novorossiysk. So there were air raid sirens going off in Novorossiysk last night. That's where the Black Sea Fleet is partially stationed at the moment due to Sevastopol being too vulnerable. A few hours ago, Tim White says, I reported the air raid sirens and drones were attacking there. Now officials say entry and exit from there are blocked at the Vladimir post, but no reason why. So there could be some strikes that took place on Novorossiysk, just don't know yet. And then so this is what Tim White had to say about Kavkaz and Temryuk. So we've got several places being targeted and quite considerable fire there at the oil depot. Earlier, Russia closed the illegal Crimean bridge for an hour. This may have been due to the drone attack on Temryuk, either drone or possibly Neptune missile, as mentioned, but just 70 kilometers from the bridge. But now the Kerch bridge has been closed again, and a fire is reported at Port Kavkaz, very close to the bridge. Unless the Neptunes at Kavkaz, or were they Ukraine's? No, that's. I think that's Temryuk. Anyway, I digress. Let us move on. So that was in and around the Kerch area. Then we have, and this is this morning, I believe, a series of drones on the way to Tatarstan in what they call a massive drone attack. So there are several places in Tatarstan that could be targeted. One of them is that drone, the Shahid drone factory, where they're getting all those local college kids, 16, 17-year-olds, to basically work in a sweatshop there, as well as African women they're getting from several places in Africa to work in that establishment. That could be one of the targets. There are many potential targets in Tatarstan. Flights were delayed at Kazan airport, and they reported Kazan or Gdynets and other businesses were evacuated. They claim Ukrainian drones were shot down and no injuries. So there does look to be at least some evidence of drones being shot down in the area, or drones on the ground. But as War Translated here says, meanwhile, another Ukro Shahid, or a few, flew all the way to Tatarstan this morning, presumably covering a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers. According to eyewitnesses, they were aiming at local synthetics plant, but were intercepted. Mass raid on Tatarstan drone factory when? So he's like wondering whether the drone factory is going to be, if not part of that attack, when will it be targeted? Because that surely has to be a really primary target in the area. Adam Kinzinger, I love this from Adam Kinzinger because I rate him as a Republican in the US. I've heard him, I've seen him be interviewed a number of times. Just got a lot of time for him. He is an honest guy. He gets slammed by pro-Trumpers because he actually sat on the team that was looking at his Trump's activities over January the 6th. I suggest you go and read something like Oath and Honor by Liz Cheney to get a good understanding of exactly what went on there and how many of those lawmakers, those Republican lawmakers at the time, were absolutely disgraceful. But someone like Adam Kinzinger has been kicked out for following the letter of the law and being honest and decent, and I think it's such a shame. Anyway, he's a veteran, and he's absolutely on point with regard to Ukraine. And when I look at people, I often look at well, if you're a decent person, then surely you would have a decent evaluation of something. Surely you would agree with me, right? Like, I think I'm a decent person, like, as we all do, right? So if I think I'm a decent person and my evaluation of Ukraine is this, then if I'm right in my evaluation with you, even though you're Republican, you might have understandable differences, but on something like this, surely you would agree with me. And lo and behold, Adam Kinzinger is freaking on point all the time. In fact, he is one of the strongest advocates for support for Ukraine and increased support for Ukraine. And I love it here. Quick reminder, ATACMS are from the last century and aren't even our best stuff, and they're crushing Russian air defences. That feels important to say. I'll just leave that there. I love it. Absolutely brilliant. So Ukraine hits Russian ferry crossing with ATACMS in Crimea, General Staff says. So this is from the other night. Moscow actively used the ferry crossing to supply Russian troops in the occupied peninsula and defended it with Russian Pantsir, Tor and Triumph air defense systems. Triumph is the S-400, the military said. So evidently, it must be something that's of high value to the Russians if they're defending it with all that air defense equipment. So overnight, Russia has lost, and this wasn't last night, the night before, 2 out of its 3 rail ferries in the Black Sea. Conroe Trader, photo 1, damaged, 1 crew injured. Avant-Garde, photo 2, damaged, ran aground to prevent sinking, 4 crew injured. Anakov, photo 3, undamaged. Also last night, a pilot boat, the Mechta, was sunk, and 4 KS-701 transport amphibious boats, of which 2 were destroyed. So 4 were taken out, or 2 were damaged, 2 were destroyed. So here's one that's been damaged and unusable. That one's been run aground because it's damaged and it didn't want to sink. This one is still available to be used. So you can see, interestingly, God, are they all burn marks on those carriages? Wow. Being taken across on a railway ferry there. And that's that third one is you're probably thinking of your captain of that one, thinking, yeah, we're going to be I think a primary target going forward. Anyway, update on the Avant-Garde. She had 4 crew injured and sustained major damage, ran aground, and is now blocking the operation of the entire Kerch ferry crossing. Ow. That is hugely significant. So, you know, even with the one ferry that's still working, can they actually use it if the course is being blocked there, the route is being blocked? Some more photos with regard to the pilot boat Mechta, which was sunk. Photos emerge allegedly of the tip there. I mean, not a lot left of it there. The tip of the pilot boat's superstructure. So that's the kind of building on top of the hull. So it's very much underwater there. Sticking out the water, update on the Conroe Trader. Starboard side amidships has suffered heavy damage with a portion of the upper hull blown off. And an update on the injuries as well, but that's less important for us. And then there was satellite imagery of the boat and ports that took damage, the ship and the ports that took damage. First photo of damage to the Avant-Garde. Ship has a heavy list in port, deck punctured clean through, and damage along the deck. So there you go. That's it's not in a good way, really. One would presume that's unusable. I mean, look at that listing there. So yeah, that's not in a good way, and that's more damage to the ship. So it's not looking good for the use of those railway ferries, and that is really significant. So we have some more detail on that. I think this is another Intel Schizo thread here. With the damage to the Kerch Strait rail bridge from the October 2022 to June 2023 attacks, weight restrictions have been placed on the bridge, and Russia's been moving towards utilising land rail routes, but they still have to get supplies to Crimea, Mariupol and Berdyansk. These train ferries are extremely rare and uncommon, and I'm still trying to pin down an exact number, though it's likely less than a dozen. Having the Conroe Trader and the Avant-Garde train ferries damaged will cause severe degradation to the Russian sea lift capability and short, medium-term degradation to Russian logistics to occupy Crimea, Mariupol and Berdyansk, which are key supply hubs. These ships are not something they can just replace due to their rarity. They still have to utilize the other routes in the Pacific and to Kaliningrad. So in other words, yeah, you might have a number of these ferries, but they're all around, you know, the extent of Russia. You're not going to suddenly be able to get them to Kerch. This will also affect Russian trade with Turkey and further impact Russia's international shipping of oil and other goods along the Samsun-Kavkaz rail ferry line. So it's really, really significant, this. It has huge implications for Russia going forward, both militarily and, it appears, economically. Exit 266 says, and I do need to get her on to do some more talking about this kind of stuff. Last night's strikes in Crimea are more important than you may think, and they make it clear that Ukraine has a plan that they have been working on for years. They started with the truck attack, which knocked out sections of road and rail for months. Next, there was an attack on a bridge supports, causing structural damage. These attacks left the rail bridge nearly unusable for logistics, which forced Russia to use ferries for heavy logistics. Ukraine has had a long-term strike campaign with both missiles and drones aimed at taking out the Rapucha-class landing ships that were handling many of the ferrying activities. So when those Rapucha-class ships were sunk, it was more to do with the logistics than to do with their military capabilities per se, about whether they can carry troops to this place and equipment in terms of an offence. No, this is like they're ferrying stuff across the Kerch Strait. These ships got hit for that reason, which brings us to last night. There are reportedly only 3 rail ferries in the Black Sea. From reports, it seems like Conroe Trader has more than just shrapnel damage, which was claimed by the Russians. The General Staff of the Ukrainians went to the trouble of providing satellite images to show the damage, quite helpful if I do say so. Slowly and unrealised by some, Ukraine has put massive cost on logistics to Crimea. The Russian position there is becoming less tenable, and this will create an opening for follow-on actions, as will the consistent destruction of air defence. Watch this space, as they say. Honestly, this is where I even just got a shiver down my spine. When you start thinking about the S-400s that have been taken out, the Panzers that have been taken out on Crimea over the last couple of years, and all the other air defence capabilities and radars, and then you look at the logistics being hit and the Kerch Bridge being suboptimal, and you're thinking, right, this is shaping for something. There is something going on here. It is just a very systematic approach to degrading the Russian ability to use Crimea, to use Sevastopol. This is good stuff for the Ukrainians. On the other hand, the Russians have been hitting Odessa. There have been almost every day recently big explosions in Odessa. Recently, the port infrastructure there was attacked once again for the 10th time during a month. A total of 215 such objects, 153 vehicles and 8 civilian vessels have been damaged and partially destroyed since the beginning of the large-scale invasion. These are systematic attacks aimed at destroying the ability of port infrastructure to export agri-products. So where the Ukrainians are working really hard to stop Crimea being used for all sorts of different reasons, primarily militarily, but there's also an economic aspect to that. The Russians are doing that to Odessa and to the ports around Odessa, Remy and Ishmael on the Danube River, because they recognize that Ukraine's exports of agri-products are integral to their economic success and their ability to fund their own defensive war. That's why we're seeing this take place on a regular basis. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. There's a lot of talk about Biden changing his mind on the use of Western weapons into Russia. However, everyone's like, oh, yeah. It's a bit like, it's a goal. Oh, it's offside. Although this is something of a goal, but it's just not quite enough, is it? Incredible. Politico reporting that POTUS says Ukraine can use its weapons to strike inside Russia, but only near Kharkiv. So I was talking in my mapping update. Imagine you can now hit all the way down. You can get right across occupied territories in the east, across the Donbass and into the Russian territories there to hit some bases with a 300-kilometer ATACMS. And he said, yeah, you can only do it in Kharkiv. Really? So Russia can turn the fire on Sumy next and complain to Biden if they're hit by a US missile. Pathetic, says Tim White. So he's not happy with that decision. Mick Ryan says the US has relaxed its, and Mick Ryan is a retired Australian general that often says good stuff. US has relaxed its restrictions on the use of the weapons on Russian soil. While these changes are geographically constrained, there are some important implications. Here's a quick assessment. So apparently the new direction on US weapons will allow Ukraine to employ American weapons to intercept Russian missiles that are targeting Kharkiv and to attack concentrations of Russian troops just over the border in the vicinity of the city. Permitted targets are apparently including Russian Air Force bombers, which launch many of the long-range missiles that attack Ukrainian civil infrastructure and civilian targets. Wouldn't it be good if you could get some Patriot successes in that northern border area? First implication is that it will allow for Ukraine to target Russian troops, especially high-value targets such as command and control elements, artillery, logistics and air defense units that are located on Russian territory near Kharkiv, and concentrating on rehearsing future operations against Ukraine. While the horse may have bolted on this particular requirement, there will be locations where reinforcements and reserve units are held, as well as logistics supply locations that might be useful targets. Second, the agreement appears to allow for targeting of Russian combat aircraft, including bombers, that are targeting Kharkiv. Now, this is key. This is important because Ukraine has shown in the past that the right planning, it can conduct air defense ambushes to down Russian aircraft targeting Ukraine with their missiles. And that's, super important. And third, unfortunately, much of the concentration of Russian forces employed in attacks on Ukrainian ground forces occurs on Ukrainian occupied territory. This is particularly the case in the south as well as in the east. Even if this policy was expanded to include some areas outside Russian territory proximate to Kharkiv, it may not be the silver bullet that some hope. Yeah, but it'd be better than not doing it, right? Fourth, it does cause the Russians to rethink any posturing on concentrating forces where there is a shared Russian-Ukrainian border. This includes Russian regions that adjoin the Sumy and Chernihiv oblasts in Ukraine. Russia has also to rethink the planning and execution of their aerial operations. Fifth, it means that Russia may step up its efforts to prevent the use of these weapons against them. This may not include attacks against targets. This not only, includes attacks against targets in Ukraine where these weapons are launched from or stored. It might also mean that Russia steps up its current campaign of sabotage against Europe to include manufacturers of long-range weapons. Finally, the relaxation of the US direction of the employment of its weapons on Russian soil is a change to policy. The Russian president and his senior advisors might now need to ponder not just the implications of this change, but whether it presages any further large shifts in US policy about the war. That's a really interesting point, that last one. So that the US is able, under pressure from foreign allies, as well as internally from people like Blinken, that they are able to change direction on this is good news for the need to change direction in other ways. What's always the issue is this happens far later than it needs to. Like, they've changed their mind an awful lot during the war on weapons, but it is annoying that they've had to change their mind, first of all, and it's annoying that it's taken so long. Now, to add to that, there's been some grey area concerning Germany. Germany's come out and very explicitly said today that they do authorise Ukraine to use German weapons against targets in Russia. This is brilliant. The dominoes are falling, the dam is bursting, says Tendar, who's German himself. The West, even when slowly, understands the necessity here. So German aid to Ukraine says, breaking, the German government is now officially authorising Ukraine to strike Russian territory bordering the Kharkiv region with German-delivered weapons. This was announced by government spokesman Sprecher, the German Stefan Habestreit, let's do it anyway. Regierungssprecher, Sprecher der Bundesregierung und Chef der Bundespräsidentes. That's my best German, that. Yeah. The German government is useless. German government thus appears to be following the line of the US government again. Now, this, okay, it's not going to include tourists, but will include the use of their Mars and multiple launch rocket systems. So in the event that they want to use these Mars that have 12 pods of missiles rather than the HIMARS, which is not tracked, it's on wheels, it does the same kind of thing, right? It's the M270 and other variants. The HIMARS is just more mobile because it can go quicker because it's got big wheels, but it only has a pod of 6. And the tracked versions have a pod of 12, so they can fire more rockets. So it could be that this is quite important, that Germany is particularly saying that you can use their equipment for that. Now, I'm not going to make comment in this video about what happened with the Trump hush money case in New York, other than it's really interesting to just watch how social media platforms operate. Now, I haven't experienced this, but then I have a very carefully curated set of sources on Twitter. Ukraine Battle Map here says, I do not follow or view any of these pages, yet this is my entire feed. The algorithm is purposefully pushing a narrative. They do the same with pro-Russian points of view. So why I'm saying this is because yesterday the news came out that Trump was possibly going to be asking Elon Musk to be an advisor with regard to immigration and all sorts of stuff for Trump if Trump was to win in November 2024. So we've already been seeing Elon Musk present a very pro-Trump, anti-Ukraine message on Twitter. And as soon as that conviction came through yesterday and Trump was found guilty on 34 counts, you had all of those voices that Musk himself amplifies suddenly on people's Twitter feeds, even when they don't follow them. And so there is a very real risk that platforms like, well, particularly Twitter, will be used as a megaphone for Musk and therefore as a megaphone for Trump. And if that's the case, then whatever Trump feels is the correct policy, you will see that amplified across, for example, Twitter. Now, if that is anti-Ukraine, pro-Russian rhetoric, then we might see that proliferate somewhat more than before if it's given the go-ahead, if these two are working together. So I'm not trying to be like overtly political here. Like, you know my views on Trump, and this is the rule of law. This is good news for law. This wasn't the Biden campaign taking him to court. This was separate to that. This was like a jury of his peers finding him guilty, and rightly so, because the evidence was there, right? The sign checks were there. Like, you didn't need Cohen for this court case to find him guilty. So that's all that. But the larger picture is, goodness me, Twitter could well be used as a real political tool overtly by one side in the US, and that may end up damaging Ukraine support for Ukraine. And then Tim White just says this, I've shown you videos like this before. This makes me sad because we see the effect on nature here, on the ecosystems around Ukraine. I think this is probably Serebiansky forest again. This has very kind of World War I feelings, doesn't it? And you're thinking, goodness me, nature has taken one hell of a hammering here, and it's just not cool. War sucks. And the sooner this war ends, the better. But my goodness, it needs to end for the good of humanity, with Ukraine prevailing. So let's do everything we can to support that. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. You take care, everyone, and I'll speak to you soon.